As we mentioned last week in our episode with our good friend Irina Ivanchenko, I recently read an article in the July-August 2023 Experience Life magazine by today's guest. As a reminder, if you're not sure what Experience Life magazine is, it's put out by Lifetime, and we actually had the editor-in-chief, Jamie Martin, on the show in episode 24. So if you haven't listened to that, check it out. But the article was titled Fitness Around the World, and it posed a fascinating concept. Writer and fitness professional Andrew Heffernan challenges readers to infuse your active endeavors with renewed energy, courtesy of the inspired movement habits of other cultures. Today, we're going to explore how movement and play can become a central theme to experiencing your travel in new and energetic ways. That's today on the Evolve Podcast. Welcome to the Evolve Podcast. Evolve your body, evolve your mind, evolve your soul, and evolve your tribe. And now, it's time to disrupt. Welcome back to the Evolve Podcast, where evolved men and women come to disrupt, connect, and get inspired. As always, joining me from his boxing cave in beautiful Oberlin, Ohio, the most interesting man that I know is W. Miles Riley. Welcome, Miles.
Thank you. Yep.
I'm not seeing
Steve?
the punching bags on the wall there, or I mean the mitts.
I don't have a punching bag. Actually, for my clients, I am the punching bag.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a fair assessment. And lost somewhere in the mountains of Utah, I am Steve Cutler. Today's guest is Andrew Heffernan. Andrew says, I'm interested in, or rather obsessed with, finding ways to move that can make you feel better, look better, and function better in every aspect of life. All of my credentials stem from this lifelong passion. Andrew continues, I've been a professional or personal trainer since 2003, and since then have helped people from diverse backgrounds achieve their fitness goals. From corporate types to school teachers and luminaries in the entertainment industry, I've helped clients lose weight, bulk up, and feel their best in record time. Finally, I think most importantly, I've helped to reshape how people feel about and think about their bodies so they feel great 24/7. Trainer, writer, speaker, and actor, Andrew Heffernan. Welcome to the Evolve Podcast.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
Great to be here. Great to have you with us. And I apologize. I stumbled a bit over the that intro. That was a bad intro. Miles, we should do that one again, right? Now, we never do second takes here. People are just going to have to listen to that.
Just going to have to deal with it. Yeah, it's fine.
Well, Andrew, I appreciate you jumping on. I want to kick it off. I want to read our listeners the first paragraph of the article that I read because I thought it was so well written. I love the concept and I loved how you wrote it. Martial arts in Brazil, salsa dancing in Cuba, stone lifting in Iceland, sport climbing in Sardinia, gardening in Okinawa, bass swinging in India. The ways in which people over the world move their bodies are varied, full of health benefits, and pretty darn delightful. Learning about other cultures often brings unexpected gifts. You're a great writer, obviously, but let's talk about why learning about how other cultures and how these other cultures move is so important to you.
That's a great question. I think that there's a certain there's a parallel between the way that people approach movement and the way they approach fitness, exercise, and then the values of the culture that they come from, right? So there's a cool way in which if you do capoeira or something like that, you actually are embodying something about Brazil, right?
Yeah.
You're actually kind of taking that on. Same with, if you're doing a very traditional martial art or something like that, running through those kata and doing everything very symmetrically and, with perfect form, there's something about Japan that seems kind of inherent in those movements. So there's a way in which, if you experience some of these cool different movement modalities that you're taking on and you're experiencing, something cool about that culture. So there's a way in which it's a sort of travelogue. It's kind of an imaginary travelogue. And that has all kinds of benefits. For one thing, you're just kind of getting out of the standard box of how we move in our day-to-day life. So even if you're someone who exercises regularly, you're someone who goes to the gym and, whatever it is, you lift weights and you get on the bike or whatever it is, we start to go, oh, well, okay, I'm fit because I know how to bench press and I know how to get on the bike and that kind of thing. But most of us have experienced this where all of a sudden we're thrust for some reason or another out of that habitual kind of movement, even if it's intense movement, maybe we hit a heavy bag or maybe we climb a mountain or something like this. The next day, even if we are in shape, and I'm making air quotes with that, if we're in shape, we go, oh my God, I didn't know that I'm so sore from doing that thing. So there's always more to explore. There's always different rhythms to explore, different planes of motion to explore, just different approaches and modality, different speeds of movement, different ranges of motion for the joints. I mean, we're just talking biomechanically. And then there's the whole, well, how is fitness sold to us? How is it presented to us? Again, in capoeira, I don't want to belabor that one, but like in capoeira, you're learning to play a musical instrument while you're exercising. And where in the United States is there any exercise modality where it's like you're given a tambourine and expected to do that in addition to lifting a weight or doing a cartwheel or something like that? Yeah. So this just multi-modality, multi-level, multi-sensory kind of approach to fitness can just keep expanding your sense of how to move. How can we be healthy? How can we sort of celebrate this, wonderful instrument that we're all, endowed with throughout our whole life. So, you can do that by exploring everything that is at your local 24-hour fitness, but you can also do it by traveling the world, either actually going to places and doing these things or finding a local class where you can take these things on. So those are some of the ways why I thought that was
I think that's a great perspective.
And because in capoeira, once you start getting your chords, they don't call it fighting, they call it playing.
Right.
They actually call it going up against somebody.
Yeah.
Which I find really interesting. And it's one of the reasons we also reframed. I'll still tell Steve I teach boxing and things like that, but when I get to prospective clients, what I basically tell them is we explore movement through boxing.
Yeah.
So that more people now become interested because we're talking about movement, and it's not boxing because boxing is a loaded term. I don't want to become a professional boxer. I don't box. I don't want to fight anybody. So I reframed it and I say we explore movement and we just happen to use the modality of boxing.
Right. No, that's cool. I just think about that. I mean, that's a great point, Miles, that like capoeira, you go against someone and it's considered play. Well, that is a whole, you use the word reframing. That's a whole reframing, right? So it's like in the United States, you tend to think, all right, I'm going to get into a ring and I'm going to slug away at someone until they're on the floor. You know what I mean? That's the kind of, like you said, the association we make with these combat sports, right? But if you can reframe that to, well, we're going to play together. I'm going to, of course, do my best, and you're going to do your best. And by doing our best, we actually make each other a little bit better. So there's a cooperation aspect to that form of fighting. And there's a way in which it's not just, who's going to be the stronger, the better, who's going to wind up bloodied on the mat, and who's going to wind up with the belt to the head. There's this sense that we're cooperating in this. And that is you're in a different world. You're in a different space. When you're thinking, well, we're playing together. Well, it's not as threatening. It's not as scary. My ego isn't as much on the line. We can laugh when playing music by this. So it's like, even if you best me, I'm like, we can all hug it out at the end, and then I'm going to play music for someone else, and we're going to keep going. So that's not just like getting in better shape. It's reconceptualizing of the whole idea of competition, and that's pretty cool. Yeah.
I think travel has the opportunity to do that because we go into a new place, right? And I love what you were talking about, Andrew, where you say when you get into a new place, you're not only experiencing the movement, but you're experiencing a part of their culture, and you're doing it in a way that's more authentic. I mean, if we're being honest, I remember going to a place, we actually lived in Ohio. We lived in Cincinnati for a period of time. And when we lived there, we just jumped right in to go visit all of the different places around there. And when I sat around about a year later, sitting and talking to some of the folks that had been there their entire life, and I was just checking off the boxes of here's all the different things that we've done. Most of them in the room looked at me with their jaws dropped, and they had never experienced many of those places. They had never gone rock climbing. They'd never hiked. They had never done so many of the things that were in that area. And so I think travel is a way where we can immerse ourselves in the beauty of a place, which also includes immersing ourselves in the perspective, because that collaborative play is not something that we have in America, right? So talk a little bit about when people travel, they typically have that agenda, right? They want to see the sights. Maybe they want to go to an amusement park. They want to go to the beach. What are some other things that you believe people can gain by experiencing different forms of movement and play when they travel?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, one you kind of alluded to just now, which is just interaction with the natural landscape, right? So you go to some place that has a beautiful river on it, and with rapids or something, you want to go whitewater rafting. It's like there's no better way of feeling, that connection with the elements than getting in a raft and bouncing down the river. But of course, there's hundreds of other ways of doing it too. I mean, there's cross country skiing. There's one of the ones that I wrote about here was stone lifting, and I was just in Scotland. And it's so interesting. I mean, I was in Scotland, first of all, the whole place is a golf course. I mean, it's like, it looks like you could just dig a little hole anywhere and it would be a golf course.
Nice.
Nice. That's all you need.
I live in LA. Green in your front yard.
Exactly. Like if I live in LA and there's golf courses all around, and I when I went to Scotland, I was like, oh, this is where golf should be, where there's just natural green everywhere. You don't need pesticides. You don't need herbicides. You don't need someone watering with irrigation all over the place. The rain just happens, and
That's
you
awesome.
see why. Yeah, so golf is actually like a rugged outdoor sport. That's what it should be. Not anyway. So but the stone lifting piece is the thing that really got me in Scotland, because that whole country is just, again, these massive rolling beautiful hills, and then these rugged rocks just all over the place. So you can just imagine that, even thousands of years ago, these Scottish guys in kilts would be like, I bet I can lift that thing, and I bet you can't, And it's like, and they had this, I can't remember if it's Iceland or Scotland, but where they have these progressively larger stones, and they still exist. I mean, these things have been around for thousands of years. And it's like, if you can if you're a prospective fisherman, for instance, there's that rock over there, and say it weighs 50 pounds, and you lift that, and you get this amount per day. Here's one that weighs 75 pounds. You lift that one, you get this much more per day, all the way up to one that weighs like 250 pounds. The idea is you're a more effective worker the stronger you are. So that was their resume, or that was their job interview.
That's a good resume. That's a good job interview.
Yeah, right. That's what TV. And those rocks are still there. And so one of the coolest websites that I discovered when I was writing this article was, I think it's called Lifting. It's in the article, but something like liftingstones.com or something. And it's like a map of the world, particularly this area, Scotland, Ireland, Iceland. And they go, there's a rock that's a quarter of a mile this way in the middle of this field, and it's just stuck there. And people have been lifting this rock for 500 years,
Wow.
And you can go online and see people lifting it. And there's a pair of rocks in Scotland called the Dinny Stones, which are probably the most famous version of this. So this guy kind of lifted these rocks, and they have little rings on them. And there's a whole, if you can lift even one of those rocks, you get your name in this special log at this cafe right there. Anyway, there are people that travel all around the world to lift these stones. So that's a very specific way in which you're interacting with the landscape, and that's another way in which again, you can feel your presence in a space. And certainly, I mean, obvious version of that is climbing a mountain, hang gliding somewhere if you're into like that kind of thing, or we mentioned rock climbing. So it's just a way to be like, okay, what can we do in this country that's different from what we can do in our country? And it's a great way to kind of combine everything, enjoying the travel and also getting just great new different workouts.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to not have to think about, okay, I'm going to the gym while I go to this particular area, right? It just incorporated into what you do. I think you did a nice job in the article of breaking up movement challenges. This was one of my favorite things, is how you said, hey, when you travel, here are some movement challenges you can do in these particular areas. So I want to run through the list of them and talk about some of these where you referenced strength with with Scotland and Iceland and lifting the stones. One of the first ones you said, up your NEAT. The second one is test your strength. Feel the beat, strike a pose, find inspiration in the ancient, and then finally play a game. Let's start with up your NEAT. So for our listeners, can you describe what NEAT is?
Sure. Yeah. NEAT is it's a great word, but it stands for something a little bit it's a little bit cumbersome. The phrase it stands for is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So it's kind of a mouthful, but basically just referring to any kind of movement that you do that isn't formal exercise. So it can be for anything from fidgeting in your chair to you're cooking dinner, you're walking around a little bit, you take a walk around the block with your kid or your dog, you know, anything that isn't formal exercise. Actually, the interesting thing about NEAT is that it has a greater potential for burning calories, if that is your goal, than formal exercise. When you think about it, you know, if we're just sort of doing everything right, you know, we're able to exercise, squeeze in maybe an hour of exercise, formal exercise a day, right? But you can easily squeeze in 2, 3, you know, if you kind of jigger your day right, you could get 2 or 3 hours. If you take up a hobby, like, I don't know, I mean, this is a big swing, but like if you take up carpentry or something, you're moving, you know, and you do that 2 hours a day, you're burning a ton of calories. You're burning a lot of calories. So it's like that gives you a certain amount of leeway in how much you eat, right? Gives you a little bit more freedom in how much you eat than if you're only sitting at a desk for 10 hours a day, exercising for 1 hour a day, and then sitting in front of a TV for 3 hours a day and sleeping for 8. I don't know if that adds up to 24, but you can see what I'm getting at. A lot of people are sedentary almost all of their life, and then maybe they get to the gym for an hour. So NEAT is just a way of upping your awareness, and people do this with the step apps, you know, the health app on their phone. They see how many steps they take. Some days I look at my step app, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got all of 1,500 steps today. It's like, that's awful.
Not much movement. Yeah.
Right. Not a lot of movement. But then other days you go, it's funny, when I was traveling recently, just walking through the airports, multiple airports, I got like easily 12,000 steps. I was like, wow. Just a day of travel that feels like you're just sitting on a plane actually is a fair amount of walking. Yeah. So in a place like Uganda, and that's the place I wrote about for referencing NEAT, you know, they're at a phase in their development as a country where they still have to get a lot of movement in order to kind of go through their lives. There's a lot of course, agriculture in Uganda. And so most people there get a lot of incidental movement just throughout the day. So the idea that they would even have to go to a gym is kind of ludicrous because, you know, when you do sit down and think about that, the idea that we're paying money to go and do hard labor for an hour is a little bit, you know, there's something a little bit off about that, you know? Yeah. But it's where we are, just where we are as a country. So Uganda is in its phase in its development where it's like, they're kind of at this balance point where it's like, well, this is the amount of activity that a human organism should probably get throughout the course of its day. And so it's just, their day is naturally filled with lots of physical activity. And so I think in the piece, what I talked about is like, you know, you see this all the time. How do you up your everyday activities? These are very simple ways of doing it. You know, again, when I was going through the airport, I don't get on the people mover. I walk, you know, briskly and try to keep up with the people on the people mover. I don't take the escalator, I take the stairs. You know, when I'm there's a grocery store like a half a mile from here, instead of taking the car, I wheel the little cart out and look like an old grandmother, load up the cart with the food, I wheel it home, right? So that's great. Just a way of getting a little, and everyone has their own way of doing it. Some people do the thing where they get off the bus and stop before, right? So they wind up walking maybe a quarter mile or something. And all these little movement snaps kind of add up. I don't know if 10,000 steps is really like, so there's anything magical about that, but I think that having that number in mind as a reference point can be useful just to kind of keep people moving throughout their day as opposed to sitting for 10 hours, working out for an hour, and then crashing on the couch.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
My sister is 71 years old, and I used to always tease her about the work that my clients do. And she would always say to me, bring them to my job. I always said, Pat, you need to get some exercise. And she works for Home Goods. And I've seen her work. And I've seen her unload trucks and putting stuff on shelves and twisting and turning. And at one point I had to look at my sister, apologize, and go, I am really sorry. I need to send my clients to Home Goods.
It's true. It's true. I mean, like, if you have a job like that, blue collar gets a bad rap, but I'm telling you, if you take care of yourself and you probably, if you have a blue collar job where you're moving, stretching, and lifting, all that stuff, probably all you really need is maybe a little bit of mobility, a little bit of stretching and rotation, just to make sure that the range of motion of those joints stays good. And you want to avoid overuse injuries. But in general, you don't have to worry about it.
Well, I think, the thing is, I think with blue collar workers, what we need to do is teach them that they are doing exercises so that when they get off of work, they don't head for the place to get the worst foods because they want to relax.
Yes, that's absolutely true. There was a fascinating study along these lines of, do you guys know about this with the hotel maids?
I was just going to bring that up, the hotel
maids. Yeah, go ahead. You talk a little bit, Steve.
Yeah, so the hotel maid study was pretty fascinating. They were looking at just expectation, right? I read this from the Expectation Effect book, and they were talking about how hotel maids, they went in and they were just tracking how did they move, how many steps per day, that sort of thing. What was the activity? And they changed their perception. They just the researcher said, "Hey, did you know that the exercise or the movement that you're doing throughout the day is equivalent to somebody who's very fit?" And essentially just reframed it. Well, between the time that the researchers told them and then came back, and I can't remember what the timing was, but it was pretty fascinating.
Week or something, usually.
Yeah. Every single person had lost weight. They had changed nothing else about their lifestyle. They just had reframed and understood that, oh, I am active. I am more fit than what I think. And there was this, slight perspective shift that led to a massive change in their weight. And I think that, Andrew, a lot of what you're talking about is just slight perspective shifts. Don't get on the people mover, just walk through. You don't need to go those 20 feet faster and just stand there and take a break. My wife and I joke one time, we were standing in line at a store, and it was, for some reason, we were at a store late at night, which we rarely do. And I just kind of bumped into her on accident. She goes, "Oh, don't, I'm just relaxing here." And I started laughing because that just came out of her mouth. I said, "You're line relaxing?" And she's like, "Yeah, I guess I am. I'm line relaxing." And so now that's like a big joke between us, but we do that so much. We think to ourselves, "Oh, I can't walk those extra 20 feet or 100 feet or whatever it is. I've got to step on the thing that moves me." And these slight changes make a massive difference. In your article, you talked about that this landlocked nation of New Uganda, 49 million people, and compared to a whopping 40% of Americans, only 5.5% of Ugandans are considered inactive. What a crazy thing to think about. And I'd be curious if those 40% of Americans are considered inactive, what that correlation is, because I think now we are sitting well over 70% that are overweight and obese. I mean, we are in a super majority of our country that is in the overweight obese category. A slight reframe can make all the difference in the world. When my wife and I travel, we say that if we don't hit 20,000 steps, it doesn't feel like a vacation to us, because we just love walking around. We love hitting the shops, hitting the hikes, whatever we can do. And, we find that we're okay when we eat a little bit extra when we travel. We're just fine because we're getting 25,000 steps in as we're walking, and we're fairly active, right?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I would just say this, and as a trainer, I often, when my clients will go away on a vacation, they'll be like, "Oh my God, I'm just going to eat so much, and I'm going to come back and I've gained so much weight, and I'll backslide so much." Usually it's the opposite, because of exactly what you're saying. People are like, "Oh, I want to get out there in the world." They're also sleeping better, right?
Yep.
They may be eating a little bit more, but they're probably eating less junk because they're like, "Oh, I want to eat. I want to sample the local cuisine, so it's not going to be crappy food." So generally they come back and they're better rested. They've moved a lot. They probably haven't done a lot of like really intense, heavy exercise. So they've allowed their joints to recover a little bit. So actually they come back, typically doing a little bit better,
Yeah. It can be refreshing. So, okay. So we talked about NEAT, and I know at the beginning you said, test your strength by going to some of these nations where you can lift some heavy rocks. I love that one. Let's go on to something that I think Miles is going to resonate, because as a musician, this is right up your alley, Miles. Andrew said, "Feel the beat." So how can people travel and feel the beat?
Wow. Well, yeah, dance is such an underrated form of movement.
It sure is.
Man, like I mean, I feel like my evolution as a as someone who exercises myself, it just gets more and more movement, just general, and that all the possibilities of movement just expanded so much over the years. So I started out like most young fired up guys, just doing a lot of bodybuilding type movements. So it was all very linear, very like one plane of movement. So it's like, God forbid I would ever tilt, or rotate. It was all like, okay, I'm going to squat. Everything was the sagittal plane, so straight ahead, forward and back. And then I got into little martial arts and stuff like this. Like, oh, I guess I can turn and do a down block this way and that way. Okay, that's doable. And then I got into a little bit of boxing, like you teach Miles. And then I did some Aikido, which is all these big round circular shapes. I'm a terrible dancer. My wife will attest to that. But I deeply appreciate this improvisational nature of movement that is all like, well, it is all three planes of motion at once. Your body is like the center of a sphere, right? And you are covering and responding to all this space all around you. So how can people feel the beat? Well, lots of different. I mean, there's just about every culture has at least one form of dance that is unique or specific to that particular culture. So again, if it's salsa, if it's tango, if it's there's sort of more formal versions of dance in the East, if it's like ballroom dance, I'm sure again you could rattle off hundreds of them, Miles, but like I think just go out and figure out ways to sample the local dance, and you will get the experience of moving in different and novel ways. Again, there's something in the way that we tend to approach fitness that is, by we, I guess, I mean the West, the American culture, that tends to fragment. It tends to go, we are working the biceps, right? Mm-hmm. So we are standing here working the biceps. So we fragment the body into little pieces, but then we fragment the individual away from the environment and away from his or her tribe. You use the word tribe. And I think in other cultures, they that would be ludicrous. The idea that we could take the body apart like a butcher, right? And work this chunk of meat and that chunk of meat, and then somehow that's going to add up to something, right? Yeah. Well, dance is the complete opposite of that. How do we integrate the whole body working together and then working with other people, moving with other people, and often in a setting like an outdoor setting that again gets us more in touch with the place where we are. So you're just lighting up so many different parts of the brain and parts of our sensory system that you don't want to miss it. I think it's, even if you're as terrible dancer as I am, you don't want to miss that approach to movement.
Or sometimes just asking people, and this is a tough question that a lot of people can't answer, and you have to help them get there. But what is your own rhythm? I mean, think about Seinfeld with Elaine Bennis and how horrible that she perceived to be a horrible dancer, but she was dancing to her own rhythm. She had her own thing going on.
Beat her own drum.
And that's a great jump off point. The minute you figure out what your rhythm is and dance to that, regardless of what others think. Like Andrew, you say, I can't dance, but you can dance the Heffernan.
Yeah.
The Heffernan has its own rhythm.
We'll have to see the Heffernan here.
You'd never have me on again for sure.
But it's a great point. It's not just I love how you're talking about the integration of the body and the fact that we're not just chopping it up into different meaty movements, but there's something to be said for the dexterity of the movement, the precision of the movement. I have clients that come to me, and I've specialized in post-rehabilitative or injuries or people who have got issues. So whether it's hips, knees, backs, for 20 plus years. And the one thing that I find in common with people who come to me with a hip issue, a knee issue, a back issue is what you just said. They're used to moving in basically one plane of movement, and they have no dexterity, and primarily no dexterity whatsoever in their hips. They don't have the ability to move other than at one speed with the hip and in one direction. Dance creates dexterity. Dance creates this full range integrated movement, and it's a phenomenal way for people to uh, to just connect with their body too. I think that's the other thing that I notice is we're just not connected to our bodies.
For sure. Yeah, and then yeah. I mean, you could go straight down the rabbit hole. Well, why is the hip such a problematic area? Well, you can go right down the rabbit hole, like disconnection from sexuality, disconnection from this major chakra in our bodies. Right.
Yep.
I want to just bring up one quick thing that I've been sort of mulling. I didn't bring it up in the article, but it's a cool concept that maybe your listeners might be interested in, and that's this idea of regulated versus unregulated movement. Dance, right? If you go to I've did some ballroom dancing, and a lot of times if you go to an event, there'll be a little lesson right at the beginning, and you learn how to do a box step or something like that. You go, okay, I kind of get what that is, and then so that's very regulated. You're learning how to do the right way of doing the movement, and then they give you some time to, with your partner or whoever's around, to kind of play with it, right? And then maybe you'll do the box step, and maybe you'll throw in a twirl. Maybe you'll kind of do the Heffernan or your own version, or do something that's a little bit off the beaten path of what they're doing. That's less regulated, right? But both approaches, regulated and unregulated, I think can be super valuable. Now, again, most people who are working out in the gym are doing very regulated movement. This is how you do a squat. This is how you do a lunge. This is how you do a press, right? And very few of them are doing something like dance, where it's like, well, let's go crazy and let's do a rotation, let's do a side bend, let's just kind of feel, do the Elaine, like you said, feel the rhythm. And then you're just a little bit freer. And what tends to happen is that some of those regulated movements that you've practiced tend to show up in a kind of maybe a slightly more free form in your unregulated work, but it's there. It's like vocabulary. It's like learning a new language, right? So learning a new language, you got to learn declension of verbs, you learn vocabulary, you memorize lists, and then you go into conversation and you're going to stumble around a little bit, but then eventually you start to ideally get a little more fluid and start to play. Same with learning a musical instrument. You learn scales, and then pretty soon you're improvising over here. And so I think that with movement, bringing in this idea of a little lack of regulation can help people feel a little freer, a little sense of ownership, and maybe a little bit more function of stuff that's going to bleed over into their everyday lives a little bit.
I love how you talk about vocabulary, because we think about vocabulary, and this harkens back to something that I heard somebody tell me this week when I was teaching him some new exercises, and I said, it'll take some time to get coordinated with these. And his initial reaction to me, he looked at me, he's like, okay, jerk. And it kind of shocked me, because the way I use the word coordination is not that like, hey, you're an uncoordinated person, but to learn this new movement, we have to get the coordination between the muscles to do the movement properly. So don't expect to be perfect at it. And I paused. I said, hey, I apologize. What I'm talking about is the coordination of the muscles firing in the right way to do this movement pattern, right? It's not that you're an uncoordinated person. But I bring that up because vocabulary is not just in how we speak. It's what's the vocabulary of movement? What's the vocabulary of expression? Going back to what you were talking about with the tight hips, there's a vocabulary of expression with a more openness to sexuality in many countries. I mean, and you watch the way that they move their hips, they're far more open in many, many ways. And that flow of energy is something that is, it's just beautiful to watch. So learning the vocabulary of movement from different cultures, I think, makes you a multilingual individual, right? Not just learning the language, but learn the vocabulary of movement.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got 625 muscles, and you've got, what is it? Your nerves can go around the world 3 times or something. You strung them all out. So the idea that all of a sudden, all those 625 muscles and miles of nerves are going to be able to perfectly replicate a movement from the beginning is just ludicrous, right? So I think this part of it is this idea of also learning, exposing yourself to just new, unfamiliar stuff, having the being willing to look foolish. When you go into a salsa class and you don't know how to rotate your hips, you don't know what that's supposed to look and feel like. That in itself can be incredible. It's underrated. Just being willing to experience the new stuff and to learn is just an underrated, valuable health builder.
Yeah, it's essential as we get older too. There's a lot of research that's coming out now that says that the more complicated movements you can use throughout life, the better your brain health is going to be. And there's a lot of researchers that are thinking that complicated movement can be one of the keys to help to prevent dementia and Alzheimer's. So I think that as we age and we have a little bit more money to travel the world, we jump in, we start to experience this movement. We're doing some great things for our health. Well, Andrew, your next tip was to strike a pose. So talk to us a little bit about striking a pose.
He's voguing.
Yes, he's voguing.
He's voguing. That's vogue.
Thank you, Madonna.
Yeah, striking pose. I believe was that where I was covering like Tai Chi, yoga,
martial arts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I mean, again, like dance, many different cultures have some kind of fighting art associated with them, and many of them, certainly when you're talking about like Japanese martial arts, Tai Chi, which began as a martial art and then it kind of evolved into something a little bit different, kind of this universal health builder, involve these what appear from the outside like static positions, much like yoga, right? So if you've never done yoga, you might look at a yoga pose like a lunge or a down dog or something and go, well, they're just sitting there in that pose and what's happening there. But in fact, when you do it well and you have a good instructor, you are, you're sending multiple images through you're working with kind of multiple images so that a static pose actually is incredibly dynamic. So if you get into a down dog and you extend your arms and you extend your legs and you open your chest and you work with your breath, you are, in a way that is hard to detect from the outside, you are settling deeply and strongly into that pose and firing up, again, muscles that you often don't access just in your day-to-day life.
Right.
And that's the case, when you're looking if you're looking at traditional martial arts, like I did Okinawan karate for many years, and then you're learning how to very precisely execute this is very regulated movements like a down block, How do you do that? Keeping your chest open, keeping your front leg bent, your back leg fully locked out, your gaze up and out. You're enforcing this ever deepening awareness of where you are in space. So if we are, as we've said, deeply disconnected from the body in a lot of ways, this is a way of rediscovering that. So proprioception, the ability to sense where you are in space, is something that you lose over time, just like you lose muscle mass or cardiovascular fitness or these things without using them. Like I work with some older clients, and God bless them, a lot of them have no idea where their feet are in space. And then you go, well, and then is it any surprise after 70, turning 80, whatever, people fall down a lot. They don't know where they are, right? They've lost the connection of their sensory nervous system, right? So one way of getting that back is just having an instructor telling you, this is what this Tai Chi sequence looks like. You put your hands like this, reach over, swing your hands over. You're like, nope, not one hand down, one hand up. You see people trying to imitate movement and they can't quite do it because they've lost that ability to absorb and imitate movement. Well, again, this is the way of getting back, is finding these regulated movement systems that are symmetrical on both sides, that involve rotation, that involve keeping your gaze out, your awareness out to the space around you, often working with a large group of people. So that's really cool too. So you've got someone in front of you who's doing the same movement. They're creating the shape with their own bodies. Someone in front of you to your left, you turn, rotate. And then at the end, your sense of where you are in space and your sense of your body goes from like having blinders on, right? This is how we live, just looking at a little screen all the time, to being, again, the center of that giant sphere where it's like, I know what's going on behind me. I know what's going in front of me. 6 directions, up, down, left, right, forward, back, right? So that's a great, some of these modalities are a great way of enhancing all that proprioception of full body awareness.
I think there's a lot to it too. When it comes to our, not just sense of where we are in space and time on the physical realm, but I think there's something much deeper there as well. I think back to my Sifu who took me through Tai Chi for several years. And the first thing that she said is, I want you to just stand in horse stance for 20 minutes and we're going to work up to an hour. And a horse stance is essentially that, you're doing this wide stance with the arms out in front and you're just going through and you're breathing. And I thought, well, that's crazy. Why would I do this for that long? Thinking that it was just one thing, but it's not one thing. The breath is movement. And so as the breath continued to come in and go out, I was working my diaphragm. I'm working everything within my body. As I'm breathing, I'm having to move, adapt, adjust, but I'm resonating now with what's going on inside of me. And one of the things that I found most valuable was that Tai Chi allowed me to tap into the emotional and the spiritual side at a much better level. We are so disconnected where our emotional intelligence, I've said for years that I believe technology has moved so fast that our emotional intelligence has not been able to keep up. We can get things in an instant, but we don't know how to process. And so I don't think we're necessarily in the age of translation. I think we're in the age of, the age of information. We're in the age of translation. We have to be able to take all of the content that's coming at us and translate it into now what? What am I going to do with this? So I love how you talk about this with martial arts, that you've got symmetrical mimicry, side-to-side movement, but we're creating proprioception on the inside and the outside. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know as somebody who's done martial arts, what did you notice as you went deeper into the practice?
Yeah, I mean, I did many different martial arts for many, many years. I was kind of a dabbler. I did very traditional Okinawan karate. So it was like, I think I learned like 30 or 40 kata, someone with weapons and stuff. Very little in the way of actual sparring, contact, that kind of stuff. And I was doing that concurrently with my master's degree in theater and acting. So that's another thing that I do. And so what I found there was, this profound connection with the ground, and also a sense of being able to focus my power, right? So you're working with an air shield or something to kick or to punch, right? So this ability to find the connection to the core, right? So the whole functional fitness terminology. Everyone loves to talk about the core, right? When you start to feel that you actually throw a punch with your diaphragm and with your center, and that the arm is really just completing the move, that's when you actually start to be able to express power, right? And then that translates into, if I want to do a racket sport, or if I want to box, or if I want to play golf or something like that, it's all right there in the core, right? So just very practically, you've got the connection again with the ground, the more traditional martial arts are again like strenuously symmetrical. So if you do something on your right side, you better bet you're going to do on your left side too. You're going to rotate to your right and rotate to your left. As we go through life, that vocabulary, that movement vocabulary tends to get less and less. So if you're constantly reinforcing a broader vocabulary of rotating both sides, reaching up, reaching down, reaching to the side, then your body just goes, we need to hold on to this. We need to hold on to this. And then that increases your joint range of motion, which increases the joint health. And I think, you mentioned kind of the more metaphorical resonances of this. The more you experience and embody this idea that, a space all around you is available and I can reach anywhere, up, down, side. Well, that's very literally a broader perspective, and it's also very metaphorically a broader perspective. I have more options. I have more choices in my life. So if you're someone who has few choices, who has a rounded posture, who sits at their computer all the time, you will start to embody lack of choice. It's a kind of prison, right? Yeah. And if you go the other way, even if you go from being that guy to taking a class a couple times a week where you're turning and rotating, that just starts to open up the world to you in a very literal sense, right? And then that starts to snowball into, well, in what other ways am I sort of imprisoning myself? In what other ways am I limiting myself? You talked about emotional intelligence, right? You take a salsa class, you're going to get in touch with sexuality. Some things are going to start to come up, right? Yeah. And that's not a bad thing for most people. So I feel like I'm all over the map with your question.
Yeah, that's great. That was
Yeah.
a great answer to it. So, okay, so now the next one that you had brought up, you said find inspiration in the ancient. And this in this tip, you actually reference a tool that I've actually been playing with recently, and that's the mace. But you said, hey, get involved. Kettlebells, gata, the Indian club, the mace. These are all in ancient implements or instruments that you can utilize. Talk a little bit about finding inspiration in the ancient.
Sure. Well, most of these tools, they're either based on like farm implements or they're based on ancient weaponry, right? So it's gone way back, right? We're not even just talking, we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of years, when did you plow the land or needed to, fend off some marauders from taking over your village, you tended to hold something in your hand and swing it, right? It's a force multiplier. And it's these objects that you swing as opposed to just lift like you do with the dumbbell.
Yeah.
It's a more dynamic relationship with gravity, right? So if you're pressing a barbell or a pair of dumbbells, it tends to be straight up, right? Linear relationship directly 90 degrees up from the ground, right? Whereas if you do the movement that everybody knows or is familiar with, tends to be a kettlebell swing, right? So you're swinging that kettlebell up. It sort of becomes weightless as it approaches the top of its arc, and then it comes down, and then it has weight again. So you're in a sense dancing with that implement, right? Whether it's a kettlebell or a club. I just started playing with steel clubs recently, and they're great. They're so much fun. I started working with this guy, Mark Wildman, who has a huge YouTube presence. But I was working with at a workshop with him, and you're doing all these kind of cool things where you turn, you swing down, you catch it, and that has such cool effects on the way that your shoulder move. That is so different from just working in a linear fashion. Now I keep on bagging on like bodybuilding and weightlifting type of movements. I do that stuff all the time, and I actually love it. Right. But you're trying to expand your vocabulary. You're trying to sort of enhance your longevity and your health throughout your whole life. Doing these movements that involve indirect movement as opposed to linear movement, it tends to, I feel like it works with your body, right? There's a little less sense of, I need to overcome this, and now it's overcoming me, and now I need to overcome this, right? You're dancing and playing with this thing, and it has a playful kind of vibration to it, right? It's more dynamic, it's lighter, it's more like a dance. And I think that everyone should get hold of something like that and just try it a little bit. I've had just such fun with it, and I think they're great.
Yeah, I think it's something, I mean, some of our listeners might hear me say this and they may be looking funny, but I think it's actually one of the best things that you can do for prevention of injury. Obviously, if you don't drop the kettlebell on your foot or you don't hit yourself with the mace, but there's a deceleration component that is critical. We accelerate a lot in our life. We move quickly, but we don't decelerate. And what a lot of people don't know is many joint injuries come because the joint, you have not trained the ability for that deceleration. And so those rotational movements, the integration, the play, but there's a deceleration component that becomes more and more important as we age. And Andrew, that leads us to our last one, which is play a game, right? So you had a tip of play a game. And I know we talked about play. But you made a comment that I couldn't agree with more in the article, where you said one of the most underrated aspects of fitness is play. Talk to us about how we can find play when we travel.
Oh, well, I'll just tell a quick story from my trip to Scotland just now. They have something there called the Highland Games. You've probably heard of the Highland Games, but the Highland Games, for people who don't know, it's this hundreds, maybe thousands of year old tradition where, a bunch of burly dudes in kilts get together in one of the many, many beautiful green fields in Scotland, and they throw things, they run around, they jump, right? It's essentially track and field, but again, using the kind of implements and the environment of the local terrain. And so we went there. We went to Inverness, and there was the Inverness Highland Games, and I was like, we have to go to that. And so we walked over to this giant field, and lo and behold, there was like, you could sign up and you could do. So it was like, really? I could just sign up and do this? So I was like, hell yeah, let's sign up. So
Nice.
signed up for a couple of, I didn't want to throw, they do things like where you throw a hammer, and there's one where you take a 56-pound, essentially a kettlebell, and you throw it up and backwards over like essentially a pole vaulter's bar.
Yeah.
So their guy throwing, the world record was broken. The guy threw a 56-pound weight over 17-foot bar.
Wow.
Astonishing.
Wow.
So how do you integrate play into your travel? You know, we were lucky because we found this place and we're like, we got to talk with a bunch of Scottish people. My son did the shot put. He's 14-year-old. He actually won me. My son is now a professional athlete officially.
Wow.
Won money.
That's
14
awesome.
years old. And he
That's
put
cool.
the shot. He did long jump. He did the 100-yard dash. I ran a couple of races, and I didn't win, but I did disgrace myself horribly at 52. And it was just a great sense of kinship, camaraderie, fun, and integration with the local people and the environment, right? And the stones and the implements that they had in that culture. Now, you want to go to I forget the country where it is. It's maybe I can't remember. It's all through Europe now, but basketball, which I wrote about. Insane sport that involves like trampoline, somewhere between trampoline and soccer and volleyball, right? I mean, what a crazy thing to just jump into. No one's going to be an expert at that. Just go in and have a good time. So I think, and Miles brought this up, this idea of playing capoeira, right? I think that in the US, you know, we're so hyper competitive, and the idea of like losing, you know, it just feels like, oh, we're going to somehow, our identity is going to crumble if you just go out and just open yourself up to, we're going to play, we're going to have fun, we're going to tussle a little bit, or we're going to just exert ourselves a little bit, and just frame it in the sense of play and integration and connection with other people. Then it doesn't matter the outcome. It just matters that you're having a good time and you're doing something new.
Well, it's that experience of just getting out playing and you know, taking aside this whole idea of like, what do I look like? What are people going to think? I had a client just get back home from a trip to Europe. He travels quite a bit to Europe because the company that he works for, they do a lot of business there. And he showed up and he was essentially this guest of honor, where they were doing this big party and they were playing. He was explaining it to me. It was like baseball, but not baseball. And so they looked at him and said, hey, you're the American. You played baseball, right? And he goes, yeah, I did. Okay, here's what we do. And so he's trying to explain to me how they played this game. And it's not cricket, because that was the first thing I said. Was it like cricket? He goes, no. It literally, I can't even remember what it was called. But he had such a great time. It was, you know, I hate to say this, it was probably a less athletic version of baseball, which I don't know how athletic baseball is. When you're just standing out there waiting for the ball to come, there's a lot of downtime. But he had a great time. And, you know, much like you, where you showed up and said, oh, this looks cool. About, I don't know what it was, probably 3 or 4 weekends ago, we were at our my parents' condo in the mountains, and we were there supporting one of our coaches here at Evolve. She was doing the Spartan trifecta race, and so on Saturday we went and watched her come into the you know, the end there, and my wife and I looked at each other and was like, oh, that looks like fun. And I looked at her, I said, you thinking what I'm thinking? She goes, yeah, let's do it. So we went down and said, hey, can we sign up for the race tomorrow? And so we did, and we just jumped in and did it the next day. And what a blast. It was so much fun. And, you know, the biggest question that Danielle asked me, she says, well, are you going to stay with me so that we can do it together? Are you going to go off? I said, I don't know. Let's just play with it. Let's see what it is. We had such a great time doing that race together and supporting each other, you know, through the implements. It was and it pushed me. It was something that, you know, I'm a hiker, I'm a trail runner, and going up that elevation, it was the thing that beat me more than anything. I was shocked by it. And then the second thing that was the most difficult for me, I was able to do all the activities, all the things, and accomplish everything, including the javelin, which I was really shocked that I could throw a javelin and get it stuck.
That has kicked my butt every time. So
I thought there's no way. I don't think I'm going to be able to do the javelin, but I got it to stick. the thing that was the hardest was the Atlas stone. And I thought that was going to be the easiest because I tend to pick up and carry a lot of things. I deadlift stuff quite a bit, but yeah, there was something about that where that day I was tired. So as you can imagine, when I got home, I have two things on my list: Atlas stone and faster elevation gain. So last weekend I went up to the ski resort that's 10 minutes from our house, and I clocked myself on how fast I could get to 1,000 feet of elevation above where my starting point was, to just say, okay, now here's my baseline. We're going to train that. But it's fun, and it doesn't matter what other people are looking at. If you're doing it great, if they think you're doing it well, like, you're just playing, you're having a good time. And I think that's a big part of what movement is.
Yes, Spartan, I mean, they don't need a plug from me. They're doing just fine. But I think part of why they're doing just fine is what is the kind of things you're describing. Is like they integrate a sense of community and fun and nature, right? And challenge, right? Just like CrossFit did. They were like, CrossFit was like, all right, you're going to work hard, right? And a Spartan race is no joke, right? Even if you do the shortest one, there's going to be moments where it's tough. And so they've found that community building thing and a little bit of like, a goal. Like, all right, I wanted that stuff. Like I took people on a Spartan race, maybe in pre-pandemic, a couple, I took a group out. So let's do a 5K Spartan. I'll stick with you. I'll help you, And a lot of people who really I didn't expect were going to go would do that kind of thing jumped in. I was like, okay, let's see what we can do. Nice. And they got through it, So there's a way in which, and again, this isn't just a big plug for Spartan, but the reason I think they've done so well is because they've integrated a lot of the things we're talking about here. Yeah. They've gotten away from just purely regulated movement, just purely in a box, on a treadmill, looking at the TV, the disconnection from the body, the fragmentation of the body, the removal from tribe. This thing that we've all done in the name of convenience with fitness has also thrown away the baby with the bathwater, all these wonderful things that actually enhance our lives: a sense of connection with others, sense of integrated movement, a sense of presence in nature. All of those things are incredibly health building, and the more we can get back to that, I think the more we can enjoy movement as opposed to think of it as a grind.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Andrew, what a great article and what a great conversation. We really appreciate you coming on and recapping some of this for our listeners and walking through some of the great benefits. And on that note, folks, it is time for us to wrap up another episode of the Evolve podcast. Well, Andrew, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, follow your personal evolution, and continue to see all the great things you're doing?
Sure. Probably the best way is my Instagram handle, Andrew Heffernan Fitness, and you can just follow me. And I post all kinds of things on there, fitness related materials certainly, but I post personal stuff on there. Again, I'm an actor, so I'll post stuff on there. And that was a conscious choice because fitness is a part of what I do and part of who I am and part of what I teach. But I also want to model, to the extent that I'm a model of anything, the fact that we want to have a broad life, right? It involves lots
fully
of
integrated
things. The arts, relationships, right? As well as travel, movement, and all that kind of stuff. So jump on there if you're interested. You can always DM me if you're interested in anything, any of my services as a trainer or anything like that. I also teach, and I'll plug this, I teach a 4 times a week class on Zoom.
Very cool.
7:30 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 8 a.m. on Saturday. That's Pacific time. And if you ever want to jump in on that, again, just send me a DM. I have, for anyone that's new, I give them 4 free classes if they want to try it out for a week. And then if you want to join in, then there's a way of doing that as well. So lots of different options. Andrew Heffernan Fitness, just use the little @ before for my Instagram handle. And that's the way to keep up with me.
Great. And we'll link all that in the show notes. Well, again, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure our Evolved listeners took note and are already planning their movement on their next vacation. So evolutionaries, remember that it does take time and consistency to evolve, but first you have to disrupt. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Evolve Podcast. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. And if you haven't done so, please give us a rating. As an independent podcast, it really helps us get more reach. This podcast is part of our mission to help millions of people evolve into the best versions of themselves. Please check out our coaching services at evolve-cast.com or pick up some of our Evolve merch. Until next time, keep evolving.